There was a famous rabbi in Europe a few generations ago who had a real talent for making up a story for every occasion. Almost any time he was asked for an explanation of some idea in Judaism and in the practice of Judaism, he would have a story on the spot. The custom was that he would have many guests for his Seder meal. Passover, special meal, he would invite many guests. Some of them were scholars, and some of them were very simple, uneducated people. But he loved them. The scholarly guests were not so friendly. And they didn't understand why these people were sitting at the same table with this famous rabbi. So one year, one of the guests, who was very simple, he could barely read Hebrew, but he was so excited, he was so inspired to be sitting at the rabbi's table that he read the text of the story, the telling of the Exodus from Egypt. He read it with great enthusiasm out loud, and he was massacring the language, mispronouncing every other word. The scholarly folk were a little annoyed by it. But then there was a sentence in the text that says that we are meant to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt when we have matzah and bitter herbs lying on the table in front of you. So the story should be told over matzah and bitter herbs. The Hebrew word for lying on the table is munachim. The Hebrew word for related through marriage is mechutanim. So when this simple guy saw the word for lying on the table, he thought he recognized it as a familiar word, and he pronounced it mechutanim, related through marriage. The scholars found that so hilarious they couldn't control themselves and broke out laughing. Poor guy was embarrassed. So the rabbi immediately came up with a story. And he said to the scholars, no, why are you laughing? There's truth to that. The matzah and the maror are related through marriage. And he came up with this story. He said there was once a very wealthy man, getting along in years. He wasn't married because he was paranoid that whoever would marry him would be interested only in his money. And so he refused every offer. But he's getting older, he wants to have a family. So one day he's sitting in the tavern, in the kretschme, and he's pouring his heart out to the bartender, as people do. So the bartender says to him, I just hired an assistant cook. She's an orphan, she's very poor. She doesn't know what a dollar bill looks like. She's a very innocent girl. They met, they liked each other, and they decided to get married. Now the guy is so excited. He hires the best cooks and the best chefs, and he's in a hurry. He wants everything prepared quickly so that the marriage can happen very, very soon. Keeps running into the kitchen to see if it's happening. And it wasn't happening fast enough. So he urged them to do it faster. So they turned up the fire under the cakes, and the cakes burnt. The girl who worked in the kitchen, the bride, saw the husband, to-be, go into the back room of the tavern and cut off a corner of the soiled apron that she had worn when she worked there. He cuts off a corner of the apron, he puts it in a little plastic bag, and he puts it in his pocket. She thought that was interesting, so she goes and scrapes some of the burnt crust off the pan of the cakes and puts that in her pocket. They were married, everything was great. But the holiday came, and the wife said, all the other husbands are buying their wives gifts. How come you haven't bought me anything? The guy said, oh no, it's happening. She's only interested in my money. So he takes out the little piece of cloth that he had cut off from the apron. And he says to her, do you recognize this? You remember this? Do you remember slaving in the hot kitchen? And I took you out of there, and I brought you here? And you're not content? You're not grateful? You want more? So she pulls out the burnt crust, and she says, who was so anxious to get married? Who rushed the cooks? Who made them burn the crust? So who's doing whom a favor? So you see, the matzah is like the burnt crust, and the corner of the apron is like the bitter herbs. God says to us, you're complaining? You want more? Eat some bitter herbs. Let it remind you how bitter things were in Egypt. And I took you out of there, and I saved you from slavery, and I brought you to your... And we take out the matzah. And we say, oh yeah? Who rushed us out of Egypt so quickly to get us to Mount Sinai for our wedding that we didn't even have time for the dough to rise? So this is mutual. And in that way, he saved the poor guy the embarrassment of having mispronounced the word, because he made it legitimate. That really is the story of Passover. It's a mutual admiration society. So we call it Chag HaPesach. We call it Passover, which means literally God passed over the homes of the Jewish firstborn when the Egyptian firstborn were being killed by a plague. But God refers to the same holiday as the festival of matzah, Chag HaMatzahs. So God is saying, I can't get over the fact that I rushed you out and you didn't even ask, what are we going to eat? You went along with it. I owe you. And we say, no, it's the festival of Pesach. You protected us while we were in Egypt, so we owe you. Either way, it's a bond. It's a marriage. It's a relationship. My father-in-law, Rabbi Sholem Ber Gordon of Maplewood, New Jersey, a very, very special man. And every year at the Seder, he would tell this story. And it's one worth repeating. The matzah and the bitter herb.